This is a quick introduction overview of the Docker deployment functionality added in 10.3.3 Rio. If you're not familiar with Docker, you can think of it kind of like a virtual machine light. It's a container system that you can use that makes deploying software easier, which is especially useful when deploying RAD Server. This is just a basic introduction to Docker and deploying to Docker from the IDE. I'm going to be using a Microsoft Azure instance. I'm using their spot pricing, which makes it really affordable here. And let's see, I'm actually using the general purpose. I can't remember, compute optimized general purpose, fairly cheap. You can sign up and get $200 credit. Lots of options. You can use a virtual machine or whatever, but I just thought it'd be interesting to deploy to a remote instance. So I have set up a instance here. There is my IP address. Now, to install Docker, I'm installing Docker Community Edition for Ubuntu. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to walk through this here. If I jump out here, I can find my IP address. There it is. So I'm just going to connect to the IP address there. And now Windows has a SSH in it now, which is great. Oops, I forgot to type in my username. So Delphi. Let's shrink that down just a little bit. Instructions over here. I'm going to start with the removing any existing ones. I don't think there should be any on here, but it's just going to remove any other versions of Docker that may be previously installed. All right, nothing there. And we're going to then install Docker. So this apt update is going to just update all the packages, lists the directories of what can be installed. We then have to actually specify how to install Community Edition. Apparently it's not in the default repositories. So this is going to install the prerequisites that we use for this step here. And then we need the Docker GPG key, which is what we use to know that we've connected to a valid instance. So this is downloading it via curl and adding it to apt key. And the fingerprint here. All right, so now we've done that. So now we can do if we do apt update again, we should see, well, no errors at least. That's a good thing. All right, so we want to install, oh, that's right. We got to add the repository. I skipped the step. Add repository. So this is going to add the repository. So the steps there so far were to validate the repository that we're connected to the right one. And now we've added the repository. And now when I do update, we see we have the Docker repository listed here. So this means it can download the software directly from Docker. So we want to install Docker. And it's going to take a second. Actually, it shouldn't take too long because this is running on the cloud with a lot of bandwidth, but it does take a few minutes to install things. This does have instructions for if you want to install a specific version of Docker. I doubt you want to do that. Also, we went with the stable release. You could go with nightly, not recommended. So stick with stable and probably just go with the default regular version of Docker. Okay, so Docker's installed. Now, this is where this did not work for me when I tried this before. Let's try it now and see if it does it. Oh, this is working now. So this is the Hello World Docker container. So this is a small Ubuntu. It's almost like a virtual machine, like I said, but it's just a container that has the very basics of what's needed to run in the Hello World, and it ran it successfully. Now, I did have instances where I did this and it would give me an error message saying cannot connect to the Docker daemon. And what I found I had to do is do this Docker service start, which I'll show you what that looks like here, like that. And then it would start the service. So if you get an error message when trying to do that, you need to start the Docker service, and then you can check to see if Docker is running by typing sudo docker engine check. Now we want to install the Docker container for PA server. So if we go to Docker Hub, this is the repository of Docker containers. And we see there's 3 for RAD Studio. And we're going to install the basic one here, which is PA server. Okay, so this is just PA server, whereas this one has RAD server and interface, and that's all covered in the documentation here in our doc wiki. If you come here, we can see there's the three, and it talks about what the differences are between them. So we're going to install. There we go. It's downloading it. It's done. It's downloaded the container for PA server. And so now we're going to run this, and I'm going to walk you through this, what this looks like here. Sudo, this is just saying we're going to run a super user. Docker is the name of the system we're running. Run. And then IT is in foreground mode. And then -P is a port we're going to map. So we're going to say we want to take port 64211 within the Docker container, which is the default port that PA server runs on, and we're going to expose it as 64211 on the instance it's running on. Okay? And then we tell it what we're going to run, which is RAD Studio /PA server. All right, it's go. It's ran it. It's started up the instance here. Started the container, and we're in PA server. Now, one note is if I do I in here, it's going to be a different IP address. We don't want to use that IP address. Instead, we want to use the IP address here because that is the IP address of the instance. So let's go ahead and jump into the IDE here. So let's go ahead and say connect to Linux, and this is Docker Azure. So there's the IP address. So the password, you notice it didn't prompt me for the password, and I didn't enter anything in there, but there is a default password for these containers, empt docker. So let's put that in here. Now this won't be able to connect because there's one more thing I have to do. In the Azure console, to come over to the networking, and I have to add an inbound port rule. So it's basically like a firewall, and I want to add 64211 TCP. Source range is any, and description is PA server. And now I should be able to connect successfully. All right, so hit finish. Set that as selected. This is just a simple hello world, or in this case, hello Docker console application. And we have now our SDK, which I set up previously, and now we're pointing to the Docker connection. So I can run this, and it will run in the Docker instance. And I'm going to resize this here so we can see. Just finished deploying, which is uploading it into Docker, and now it ran it in the Docker container on the remote Azure instance in the cloud. And that is the basics of setting up and configuring and connecting to Docker. The future videos will go into more details on working with RAD Server within Docker.